The world is watching. What began as a simple trade dispute between the U.S. and Canada has now triggered a global chain reaction. Contracts frozen, supply chains shattered, and alliances questioned. Canada has drawn a line not in sand, but in steel. And every nation is now asking, should we do the same? This isn't a policy disagreement. This is a redefinition of sovereignty, and it might just change how nations do business forever. At first glance, it looked like just another routine policy update. But what Canada did wasn't policy, it was precision warfare dressed in legal paperwork. By invoking a new doctrine called the Reciprocal Access Framework, Canada effectively shut out billions of dollars in U.S. companies from bidding on Canadian government contracts. This wasn't a headline-grabbing tariff or loud retaliation. It was quiet, legal, surgical, and yet the impact was seismic. As America reeled, Canada moved swiftly to fill the vacuum. Global players began pivoting their industrial strategies toward Canadian soil, seduced not just by access to contracts, but by the stability of a country that had turned U.S. tariffs into a selling point. Germany's Siemens explored a power tech facility in Manitoba. South Korea's POSCO relocated cold-rolled steel processing to Ontario. Finland's Udeku announced a feasibility study for a stainless steel plant in Nova Scotia less than 48 hours after Canada's directive took effect. These were not slow, calculated moves. They were fast, strategic shifts signaling a clear message: Canada is open for industrial dominance. Even more telling was the EU's response. Brussels accelerated joint ventures with Canada under the Green Steel Initiative. Mexico, expected to stand with the U.S., chose silence. President Claudia Sheinbaum simply stated, "Mexico has the sovereign right to pursue its own industrial strategy." Translation: you're on your own. Washington. In this new trade, landscape localization isn't protectionism, it's policy evolution. Countries like Australia and India are already studying Canada's model, while others in South America debate defensive procurement strategies. Canada didn't just retaliate, it offered the world a new blueprint. The question now isn't who will copy Canada. It's who can afford not to. $14.8 billion in contracts were frozen overnight. Transportation systems halted mid-project. Defense procurements hit pause. From subway systems to military gear, Canadian ministries sent a single message: you want access, build here. If your company doesn't manufacture at least 50% of its components in Canada, or an official free trade ally, you're simply out of the game. No exemptions. Not even for American legacy brands. This wasn't just surprising, it was unprecedented, especially since Canada based its entire legal justification on the exact same clause that Donald Trump had used just a month earlier to impose steel and aluminum tariffs, Section 232 of the U.S. Trade Expansion Act, citing national security concerns. The irony was sharp enough to cut steel with America's protectionist playbook had been hijacked and turned against itself. And the blow didn't just hit Washington, it landed squarely in Middle America. Small and mid-size U.S. firms with no existing Canadian operations were wiped out of the running. Jobs that had seemed secure just days earlier became casualties in a silent economic war. Companies like Oshkosh Defense and Steel Dynamics saw contracts disappear, expansion plans frozen, and layoffs loom. Meanwhile, global competitors from Germany's Siemens to Korea's POSCO swept in, offering to build facilities on Canadian soil to replace the Americans. In the span of 48 hours, Canada didn't just react, they redefined the game. And in doing so, they revealed a hard truth: the age of free access is over. Welcome to the new age of economic sovereignty. The question is no longer, is this fair? It's, are we ready for this new reality? Welcome to the new era. Welcome to industrial sovereignty. What began as a steel tariff has become a geopolitical fracture, and the consequences reach far beyond numbers and contracts. Canada has built an economic perimeter wall not out of nationalism but out of strategy. A strategy that says we don't close our doors, but we decide who walks through them. Meanwhile, U.S. companies that spent decades cultivating cross-border partnerships now find themselves stranded. Not because they failed, but because they didn't adapt fast enough. Canada incentivized localization. The U.S. punished cooperation. And now the tables have turned. China watches silently from the sidelines, waiting to capitalize on Western disunity. What if France, Brazil, or the UK adopt Canada's model? Will the US retaliate against every ally? Or will it be left behind in a new world where local presence trumps global loyalty? The harsh truth is this: America's attempt to assert dominance may have triggered the very decentralization it feared most. In trying to control access, it lost influence. In demanding loyalty, it exposed fragility. And now, in a world where supply chains are political weapons, only those who rewrite the rules will survive. The question is no longer, is this fair? It's, are we ready for this new reality? Drop your thoughts below. Is Trump right to hold the line? Is Canada right to draw one? And are we witnessing a smarter economic order or the slow collapse of free trade? Comment sovereignty over globalism if you believe economic control belongs at home. Subscribe to this channel for more geopolitical breakdowns that the mainstream won't tell you. Share this video if you think others need to see how fast the world is changing. Welcome to the new era. Welcome to industrial sovereignty. The events of June 2025, when Canada blocked U.S. access to its public procurement markets, offer a powerful and surprising lesson in modern geopolitics and economic strategy. What at first appeared to be just another policy dispute has since revealed deeper insights into the shifting balance of global power, the fragility of long-standing alliances, and the dawn of a new era in trade strategy. First and foremost, Canada's move shows the power of quiet strategy over loud aggression. While the U.S. used tariffs, public confrontational and immediate Canada chose a different path. It didn't retaliate with taxes or embargoes. Instead, it designed a policy framework that aligned its national interests with legal legitimacy. By requiring foreign suppliers to have at least 50% of their manufacturing in Canada or a free trade partner country, it reshaped the rules without appearing overtly hostile. This is a textbook case of using regulation as a form of economic warfare. The second lesson is about using your opponent's tools against them. The legal basis for Canada's new rules came from Section 232 of the U.S. Trade Expansion Act, the exact same law Trump used to justify his steel and aluminum tariffs just a month earlier. This clever mirroring stripped the U.S. of any moral high ground and revealed the dangers of setting aggressive precedents. When one country stretches the limits of international law, others are watching and learning. Canada's approach demonstrates how nations can reclaim leverage by mastering the systems their opponents create. Another crucial takeaway is the importance of industrial presence in a globalized world that's becoming increasingly regionalized. For decades, U.S. firms relied on cross-border supply chains, and assumed access to allied markets was guaranteed. That assumption no longer holds. Companies that had not invested in local operations found themselves excluded from billions in contracts. In contrast, multinationals that had long maintained Canadian factories such as Ford or General Electric were still allowed to operate. This reflects a broader trend in the new trade era. Loyalty is measured not by past relationships, but by current physical presence. The ripple effects from this policy shift were not limited to economics. They exposed a deeper fracture in political trust. Allies such as Mexico, the EU, and even Australia did not come to the U.S.'s defense. Some, like Finland and Germany, saw opportunities and acted swiftly to strengthen their own presence in Canada. The U.S. had expected its allies to rally behind it, but they didn't. This highlights a painful truth. Alliances are conditional, and global loyalty fades quickly in the face of national interest. For policymakers, the Canadian example provides a compelling case for proactive incentive-based strategy rather than reactive punishment. By offering access in exchange for local investment, Canada turned economic defense into industrial growth. Instead of waging a war, it extended an invitation. Invest here, and you are welcome. That message was far more effective than any counter-tariff would have been. Countries like India and Brazil are now studying similar models. Localization, once a dirty word, in globalization circles is becoming the new currency of trust. From a business perspective, the lesson is clear. Diversify your operational footprint. Companies that rely on open access and ignore localization requirements will be increasingly vulnerable. The assumption that treaties and alliances alone will protect access is now outdated. Today, governments are rethinking procurement as a tool of industrial policy. To compete, companies must think globally but build locally. At a societal level, the crisis exposed the vulnerability of the working class in the U.S. and across North America. Workers in Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, many of whom had no role in policy decisions, suddenly faced layoffs and contract cancellations. Their future was sacrificed not by Canada, but by years of over-reliance on theoretical free trade and underinvestment in domestic capability. Canada's policy served as a wake-up call. Economic sovereignty has real consequences for real people. And protecting local jobs requires more than just campaign slogans. It demands structural planning. Perhaps the most sobering lesson is this economic power. Today lies not in who shouts the loudest, but in who controls the rules. Canada didn't win this battle because it was bigger or richer. It won because it was smarter. It played within the system, but better. It turned a policy tool designed by the U.S. into a shield for itself and a sword against competitors. This shift redefines how small and medium-sized nations can exercise power in a multipolar world. They don't need to dominate, they just need to be strategic. Finally, the 2025 trade shock forces us to reflect on the future of globalization. For decades, the promise of global trade was one of open borders and frictionless commerce. But now, with supply chains disrupted and procurement weaponized, we must ask, are we entering the age of de-globalization, or are we simply evolving into a smarter, more accountable system? Either way, the path forward is clear. Nations will increasingly prioritize resilience over efficiency, sovereignty over blind integration, and national capability over dependency. Businesses and governments alike must adjust their strategies not just to survive, but to thrive in this new reality. In conclusion, Canada's bold but calculated move in 2025 teaches us that true power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through policy incentives and control of the playing field. And in the long run, that kind of power is harder to challenge because it's rooted in systems, not slogans. In June 2025, Canada launched what may go down in history as one of the most brilliant and unexpected strategic moves in global economic policy. Without imposing a single tariff or making a public threat, it effectively locked American companies out of billions of dollars in public procurement contracts. At first glance, it seemed like just another trade dispute. But beneath the surface, it revealed a deeper, more profound lesson about the evolution of modern geopolitics, the fragility of alliances, and the importance of industrial sovereignty. The first lesson is simple but powerful in today's economic world. Control of access is more important than confrontation. Canada did not retaliate against Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs with loud sanctions or emotional speeches. Instead, it introduced the Reciprocal Access Framework, a policy that required foreign companies to manufacture at least 50% of their products in Canada or an official free trade partner to qualify for government contracts. It was clean, legal, and devastating. American firms without local production were suddenly disqualified from bidding. No negotiations, no appeals, just exclusion. More importantly, Canada used the same legal clause that the U.S. had employed only weeks earlier, Section 232 of the U.S. Trade Expansion Act. The move was more than ironic. It was surgical. The United States had opened the door to protectionist policies in the name of national security, and Canada walked through that door with more elegance and effectiveness than anyone anticipated. This teaches us that when you create a new rule in international policy, you are also giving others permission to use it against you. Strategic tools, once released into the global arena, do not remain exclusive for long. Another key takeaway is the value of physical presence over symbolic loyalty. For decades, U.S. firms assumed that close political ties with Canada and NAFTA would guarantee them access to Canadian contracts. They were wrong. Canada's new rules made it clear, if you want Canadian money, you must bring Canadian jobs. Companies like General Electric and Ford, which had already established manufacturing facilities in Canada, retained their privileges. But hundreds of U.S.-based suppliers, many of them small or mid-sized firms, were abruptly locked out. In a global economy that is becoming more fragmented, local presence is no longer optional, it's essential. Canada's policy also revealed the shifting loyalties of global allies. While the United States expected outrage or solidarity from its partners, it got neither. Mexico issued a neutral statement defending its right to pursue its own industrial strategy. The European Union, instead of condemning Canada, accelerated collaboration under green industry initiatives. Germany's Siemens and Finland's Udaku quickly initiated plans to expand their footprint in Canadian provinces. In short, when the U.S. expected unity, it got isolation. This reminds us that in international politics, national interest often trumps alliance rhetoric. From an economic development standpoint, Canada's move was not just retaliation, it was recruitment. The policy didn't say no to American companies. It said yes if you're willing to invest here. That's what made it so effective. It punished foreign dependency while rewarding domestic investment. This carrot-and-stick model is now being studied by countries like India, Australia, and Brazil. Rather than shutting borders, Canada opened its economy on its own terms. In a world where multinationals chase subsidies, tax breaks, and strategic access, Canada gave them a new reason to consider its soil as a primary base. There's also a critical lesson for the private sector: never take market access for granted. Many U.S. businesses were caught off guard because they had grown used to seamless cross-border operations. But economic sovereignty is now replacing pure globalization. Firms that ignored the rising tide of industrial policy found themselves cut off from vital revenue streams. Those that had diversified their operations survived. The new rule for global businesses is this: adapt to localization or get left behind. The 2025 trade shock also exposed the vulnerability of working-class communities in the United States. Towns in Indiana, Ohio, and Wisconsin that depended on government-linked supply chains faced immediate consequences: layoffs, canceled expansions, and frozen contracts. These communities were not victims of Canadian policy, but of an American failure to protect and modernize its own industrial base. The lesson here is sobering: free markets without strategic planning can lead to fragile dependencies.